Hi. Um, it's been a bit too long before I continued this second set of video lectures. So here we are again. It's Saturday, again, very close to noon. And I thought I'd finish up this second set of lectures with a rehearsal of um, the lecture on Saussure that I gave at the end of Wednesday's class, and also reading slowly through the passage that I had wanted us to go over before we ran out of time. And then after that to give, as best I can, a summary of Chapter 1, okay, the three parts of Chapter 1. So I'm not going to go quite in length into Saussure's background or anything like that. I'm simply just going to walk us through the sequence of divisions that Saussure makes in constructing for himself, inventing, or discovering, depending on your sympathy for Saussure, the how meaning operates and how language operates too. Okay. So the first division he makes is between a synchronic approach to language and a diachronic approach to language. A diachronic approach to language is interested in how language develops, how meanings develop, what the relationships are between language. Um, uh, a diachronic approach to studying the game of chess, for instance, would be interested in why each piece came to move the way it did, why each piece is named as it is, who invented it, how has it changed, what's its relationship to other games, and those sorts of things. Whereas a synchronic approach to language is really, or a synchronic approach to chess is really just interested in the here and now of the rules of the game. It doesn't matter how it developed. If I want to play chess, all I have to do is study the structure of the rules themselves, and I'll be able to enter into it and know how the pieces move, and how to play, and how to develop strategies. Likewise, Saussure says for language, in order to study the structure of how it works and operates, it doesn't matter how a particular language or a particular dialect even developed. The only thing that matters is to take a slice here and now of a language and study structurally how its meaning and how its signs operate. Okay? That's the first distinction. So Saussure prefers synchronic over diachronic approaches to language. The second thing is the division between langue and parole. Langue refers to the abstract system that a culture incorporates as its language. So English, French, German, these sorts of things, these examples of language, and then parole is any particular utterance of that language. So right now, this YouTube video is an example of parole, an example of parole, an example of me using English, right, and playing by the rules of English in order to give this lecture. Okay, so Saussure says then to study language and how it works, we need to focus synchronically on langue. Okay, not on parole, but on langue, not on particular examples, but on the abstract system itself. And so this brings us to the sign, how the sign operates. Okay, what he means by sign is simply a linguistic unit. For the sake of ease, although it's somewhat imprecise, we'll say that a sign is any word, right, in a language. Every sign is divided for Saussure into a signified and a signifier. The signified is not the thing itself that a word refers to, but rather it is the meaning or concept that is inseparably attached to the sound image, right? So the aggregate of the sounds t, a, b, u, when we put it together, table, that's a sound image, when it is inseparably connected to a meaning or concept of table. Right, so that's a sign. That's what a sign is for Saussure. Okay, signified meaning concept, signifier sound image. Okay, are the aggregate of sounds. Saussure will go on to make two important observations or insights here. That the relationship between the signified and the signifier, although in some sense inseparable, I can't simply choose to make the sound table mean something else. Right, so it's inseparable. It is nonetheless arbitrary, meaning non-essential, meaning not natural, meaning not logical. It's completely arbitrary that the sound table evokes that meaning. Okay. Even more than that, the sign itself, table, the sound image, the meaning, only operates, it only operates within a much larger field of signs, right? Meaning that it only has meaning because it's different from other signs within the Langue, okay? Table can only mean table because it exists in a language that also has words like chair, also has words like desk, also has words like cat and hat and bat and sat and mat, right? Also has words like good and bad and good and greater and good and excellent and A and B and C and D and E and F, right? So it's only within this universe, as it were, of signs that that word can even have any currency or can circulate at all, right? So in other words, language for Saussure is not simply like a lexicon. It's not simply a big book of words, right? It's not simply a bunch of names that we've attributed to things. Rather, it's a totality of relationships between particular sounds and particular meanings that are inseparably bound together, partly because they exist within a much larger field of meanings and their inseparably corresponding, though arbitrarily corresponding, sound images. Okay. So Derrida, as hopefully those of you who've begun reading chapter 2 will see, Derrida takes this notion of arbitrarity or arbitrariness and runs with it and even turns it against Saussure at one point. And he will also take this notion of difference, and he does come up with it. He does mention this in chapter 1 a little bit too, and will run with that too, forming his own notion of difference, différence. Okay. So now let's quickly look at the paragraph that I wanted us to check out. Right, it's on paragraph starts on page 6, right, and I want to go from there. So this is under the subheading "The Program." Do you have it? Okay. So by a slow movement whose necessity is hardly perceptible, everything for at least some 20 centuries tended toward, everything that for at least some 20 centuries tended toward and finally succeeded in being gathered under the name of language, is beginning to let itself be transferred to, or at least summarized under the name of writing. If you go back and look at the last part of my first lecture series, I go over the sort of context of this statement, right? That especially in fields like cybernetics and biology and genetics, what we're finding is that writing, some notion of writing, that as we see in the program, as we see in programming code or script or gene sequences, as we're finding that some notion of writing seems to be far more primary than language, spoken language, right? That some notion of writing seems to somehow pre-exist it or encompass it, right? By a hardly perceptible necessity, he continues, it seems as though the concept of writing, let's skip the bracketed part, is beginning to go beyond the extension of language. In all senses of the word, writing thus comprehends language, meaning surrounds, seizes. Language is tucked inside writing. Writing isn't tucked inside language. Okay, let's go back and read that sentence with the bracketed part in. By a hardly perceptible necessity, it seems as though the concept of writing, no longer indicating a particular derivative auxiliary form of language in general, no longer designating the exterior surface, the insubstantial double of a major signifier, the signifier of the signifier, is beginning to go beyond the extension of language. So now that we have some background in Saussure, we can understand what Derrida is saying here. That in Saussure's system, remember, signifier is the sound image, signified is the meaning or a concept. So in this system, writing has no place. Writing exists outside this system. Writing, the written word table, is merely a signifier of the signifier of the signified, right? And so Derrida is saying that this, if writing, as it's being developed in biology and cybernetics, if writing is developing this way, this notion, this structure of the sign can't be stably considered true anymore, right? But he's going to go on to say something really weird. Okay? He says, in all senses of the word, writing thus comprehends language. Not that the word writing has ceased to designate the signifier of the signifier, but it appears, strange as it may seem, that signifier of the signifier no longer defines accidental doubling and fallen secondarity. In other words, Derrida, although this is a challenge, although cybernetics, biology, all these things seem to be challenging that linguistic sense of writing as a signifier of the signifier, right? He's going to say that although it's challenging that notion, it's not getting rid of that notion. Rather, it's making us rethink that structure altogether. Signifier of the signifier, Derrida says, describes, on the contrary, the movement of language. The movement of language itself. In its origin, to be sure, but one can already suspect that an origin whose structure can be expressed as the signifier of the signifier conceals and erases its own production. So what Derrida is saying here is that writing, some notion of writing as it's being developed in biology, cybernetics, genetics, and all these sorts of fields like this, if it's giving us a sense of writing as some kind of origin, as opposed to the logos being an origin, nevertheless, it would then be an origin that has made possible the very history of philosophy that has debased and exteriorized writing. In other words, if writing is the origin of all these things, it's an origin that made possible the fact that it could then be forgotten to be the origin altogether. It's the origin of a system that then sought to exteriorize it to the outside. It's an origin that conceals the fact that it is the origin. It is an origin that conceals that fact and erases itself as the origin, meaning that then for 20 centuries, the West has continued to think that its grounding is in the logos, in the spoken word, in reason, right? Whereas Derrida is going to show that it is writing that has always already been that origin, and a tricky origin that continually erases itself. Now, this probably seems pretty abstract, so we're going to try to work through this, actually through the rest of the book. This is going to be Derrida's refrain, right? That writing is that which possibilizes its own disappearance, right? Even as it continually announces itself as some kind of origin. So I'm going to read through the rest of this paragraph to end this video, and hopefully just reading it out loud will help ease some of the difficulty of it here. Okay. There, Derrida continues, meaning in the phrase signifier of the signifier, there the signified always already functions as a signifier. The secondarity that it seemed possible to ascribe to writing alone affects all signifieds in general, affects them always already the moment they enter the game. There is not a single signified, logos, God, spoken word, the unconscious, what have you. There is not a single signified, that escapes, even if recaptured, the play of signifying references that constitute language. The advent of writing is the advent of this play. Today, such a play is coming into its own: biology, cybernetics, contemporary literature, effacing the limit, starting from which one had thought to regulate the circulation of signs, drawing along with it all the reassuring signifieds, reducing all the strongholds, all the out-of-bound shelters that watch over the field of language. Skipping below, it is as if the Western concept of language, skip the parenthetical, were revealed today as the guise or disguise of a primary writing, more fundamental than that which before this conversion passed, passed for the simple supplement to the spoken word. Either writing was never a simple supplement, or it is urgently necessary to construct a new logic of the supplement. Right. So Derrida is not going to get rid of the notion of writing as the signifier of the signifier, not get rid of the historical notion that writing is a mere supplement to speech. He's going to go through and completely reconceptualize what a supplement is, right? That a supplement, far from being accidental, is the new essential, is an origin, is the primary origin, but according to a logic where we can't really even use that word origin anymore, right? An origin that erases its own origin. Okay. So I know that might seem a bit twisted and even somewhat convoluted and charlatanesque, but we'll try to unpack that a bit more in class, and I'll even try to do it in the next video too. Okay. All right.